She never contributed a single dollar to this company, he said, loud enough for the whole courtroom to hear. She was a housewife, a dependent, and now she wants half of everything I built. I sat very still. My hands were folded on the table in front of me. My attorney placed his hand briefly on my arm, a small steadying gesture, and I nodded once to let him know I was okay. I wasn't okay, but I had learned over 9 years how to look like I was. His name was Donovan. We met at a friend's birthday party in Austin when I was 28 and he was 31. He had this way of making you feel like the only person in the room. Not in a slick, practiced way, but genuinely. He remembered things, the name of your childhood dog, the city where your grandmother was born. He was building a software platform for small restaurant owners, something to help them manage inventory and staff scheduling without paying enterprise prices, and he talked about it the way most people talk about their children, with love, with terror, with complete and total belief. I was a financial analyst at a regional investment firm downtown. I was good at my job. I had just been promoted to senior analyst, which came with a salary bump and a portfolio of mid-market clients I'd spent 3 years earning. I wore blazers to work and kept a color-coded calendar and had a 5-year plan that I genuinely believed in. We dated for 14 months. Then he proposed at a breakfast place we both loved, no audience, no photographer hidden in the corner. Just him across a small wooden table with a ring he'd picked out himself, asking me quietly if I wanted to build a life together. I said yes before he finished the sentence. We married in September. Small ceremony, backyard of his parents' place in Georgetown, fairy lights in the oak trees. I wore my mother's earrings and cried exactly twice, once when I saw him at the end of the aisle, and once when my father squeezed my hand before letting go. The trouble with loving someone who has a dream is that the dream becomes yours too. You don't even notice it happening. You're just supportive at first. You listen. You ask questions. You stay up late talking through the business model, the pricing structure, the competitor landscape, and somewhere along the way, you stop being the person listening and start being the person who actually understands it better than anyone else does. By the time we were married, I was doing his books on weekends. He wasn't paying me. It didn't occur to either of us that he should. That's what marriage is, right? You help each other. You build together. He was working 80-hour weeks trying to get the platform functional, and I was the one who actually understood cash flow and burn rate and when to be alarmed. So I helped. Of course I helped. 18 months in, his startup got accepted into a small accelerator program in Denver. It was a big deal, mentorship, visibility, a modest stipend, but it required him to be in Denver for 6 months, and the stipend wouldn't cover both of us. I stayed in Austin. I kept my job. I transferred $2,200 from my personal savings into the business account every single month because the accelerator stipend wasn't quite enough. And I didn't want him distracted by money problems when he was supposed to be focused on growth. I have the bank records, all of them, dated, categorized, saved in a folder I started keeping almost by accident because I am, at my core, a person who cannot look at financial data without organizing it. When he came back from Denver, the platform had its first paying customers, 12 restaurants, then 30, then by the end of that year, over 200. He hired his first employee, a developer named Cass who worked remotely from Portland, and things started moving faster than either of us had anticipated. I got a call from my firm's New York office in the spring of our 3rd year of marriage. A position was opening on the institutional investment team. Senior role, significant salary increase, the kind of opportunity that come-finding move. My manager called it a career-defining move. He wasn't wrong. I turned it down. I told myself it was because I didn't want to uproot our life, that Donovan's business was finally gaining traction and this wasn't the right time to leave Austin. Both of those things were true, but the deeper truth, the one I didn't fully examine until years later, was that the business needed me. Not in a romantic way, in a practical, operational way. He had built a product people were paying for, but he didn't know how to read a balance sheet, didn't understand equity dilution, had no idea how to evaluate a vendor contract. I did. And so I stayed. I kept my day job, and spent evenings and weekends working on the business. I helped him negotiate his first significant vendor contract, saving about $40,000 over the life of the agreement. I built out a proper accounting system, migrated everything from spreadsheets into actual software, and set up a payroll process when he started hiring more aggressively. When 2 investors expressed interest in a seed round, I prepared the financial projections. I sat in on the meetings. I coached him on what questions they'd ask and how to answer them. The seed round closed at $2.4 million. Donovan called me from the parking lot after the final meeting, and I could hear him crying a little on the other end of the line, and I cried too, standing in our kitchen in my socks, 'cause it felt like something we had done together. Looking back now, I understand why I thought that. I also understand why it was never going to protect me. His company, he always called it. His platform, his investors. Even when he was thanking me, and to his credit, in those early years he did thank me, there was always a subtle grammatical distinction that I chose not to notice. The business was his. My contributions were support, help, the kind of thing a good wife does. I left my job at the firm 2 years after the seed round. The business had grown to the point where it genuinely needed a full-time CFO, and we couldn't afford to hire one at the salary the role commanded. I had the skills. I had already been doing most of the work informally. It made sense. Donovan was enthusiastic, said it would be amazing to finally have me fully on board, that we'd be real partners now. I asked about compensation. He said we'd figure it out, that right now everything needed to go back into the company, that we were in a growth phase, and once things stabilized, we'd set up a proper structure. Things did not stabilize. They scaled, which is not the same thing. Over the next 4 years, the platform grew from 400 restaurant clients to over 3,000, expanded into 2 additional markets, Chicago and Phoenix, and completed a Series A round at a $12 million valuation. Donovan hired a director of sales, a head of product, a 3-person customer success team. Everyone had titles, salary, equity grants documented in their offer letters. I had none of those things in writing. I had a joint checking account and a vague, repeated promise that we'd handle the compensation question eventually. I also had something else, something I hadn't thought about in years, in the first few months of our marriage, before things got complicated. A financial planning seminar for married couples hosted by a nonprofit here in Austin. It was a Saturday morning, a little dry, lots of worksheets. But one part stuck with me, a section on protecting individual contributions within a marriage, especially when one spouse is bringing non-monetary value to a shared enterprise. The facilitator, a sharp woman in her 60s who had been a family law attorney, talked about spousal contribution agreements. Essentially a written record of what each person is bringing to table, signed and notarized, independent of any prenuptial agreement. Donovan hadn't been particularly interested, but I had asked about it afterward, gotten the facilitator's card, and a few months later, on a quiet Sunday, over coffee, before the business had really taken off, I'd drafted something and asked if he'd sign it. He'd signed it. I'd forgotten about it entirely. For years, my attorney found it when he was going through the box of documents I'd handed him. He called me at 7 in the morning on a Tuesday and said, very calmly, "I need you to tell me everything about this agreement." I had to sit down. The shift in Donovan came gradually, and then all at once. I noticed it first in small ways. He stopped asking my opinion on business decisions, stopped copying me on investor communications, hired a fractional CFO, an outside consultant, without mentioning it to me until after the engagement was signed. When I brought it up, he said the company had grown too large for an informal arrangement, that we needed proper professional oversight. When I asked what that meant for my role, he said we'd talk about it. He never brought it up again. Around the same time, his executive assistant, a young woman who had been with the company about a year, started taking on more of the organizational tasks I'd previously handled. Scheduling, vendor relationships, office logistics. I told myself it was natural delegation. I told myself a lot of things. His mother had never particularly liked me. She was polite in the way certain people are polite when they've decided you're temporary. Surface warmth, nothing underneath. She'd been more present lately, visiting more often, and I noticed that she and Donovan had started having long conversations in the kitchen that went quiet when I walked in. I should have acted sooner, I know that. But I still believed in the marriage, and I think I was afraid that confronting what I was seeing would make it real. He filed in October. He filed for divorce and, simultaneously, filed a civil claim asserting that I had been functioning as an unpaid employee of the company and that any compensation I was owed had been constructively paid through our marital lifestyle, the house, the joint account, the vacations. His attorney argued that I had no ownership interest in the company whatsoever, that my contributions were personal, not professional, and that I was not entitled to any equity or business valuation as part of the marital estate. He also froze the joint accounts 3 days after filing. I called my sister that night, and she drove over and sat with me on the kitchen floor while I figured out whether I had enough in my personal savings account, a small one I'd maintained mostly out of habit to cover my immediate expenses. I did, barely. My attorney's name is Hargrove. Not the Hargrove in the name list, different person. He came recommended by a colleague of my sister's, a woman who had gone through her own difficult divorce a few years back. He was methodical and unflappable, and when I brought him the box of documents, every bank transfer, every vendor contract I'd negotiated, every email chain where I'd been functioning as the company's financial lead, he went through them with the focused intensity of someone doing a puzzle. The spousal contribution agreement was at the bottom of the box. He called it remarkably well drafted and asked if I had any idea what it said. I remembered signing it. I did not remember the specific language. He read it to me over the phone that Tuesday morning, and I understood as he read that somewhere in my past self's careful, organized brain, I had protected us. Or rather, I had protected myself without knowing I would ever need to. The agreement documented in specific terms my financial contributions to the business, the monthly transfers during the Denver accelerator period, the consulting work I performed, the value of the vendor contract negotiation as assessed against market rates, my role in preparing the seed round financials. It was signed, notarized, and witnessed. It had a clause stating that in the event of dissolution of the marriage, my documented contributions would be considered compensable at market rate for equivalent professional services. We had signed it in our living room on a Sunday morning. He'd been eating cereal. I remember that now, the sound of the spoon hitting the bowl while I organized the papers. The hearing was in February. His attorney opened with confidence. He was a polished man who clearly felt that the facts were on his side, and in a narrow, selective reading of events, perhaps they were. He argued that I had been a spouse, not a partner, that I had been supported by the marital estate throughout our time together, that I had no title, no formal contract, no equity grant, and therefore no claim. He said, looking briefly at me, that I had never held a professional role within the company. My attorney let him finish. Then he submitted the documents. The bank records showing 26 months of direct transfers from my personal savings account to the company's operating account, totaling just over $57,000. The email chains showing me as the primary negotiator on 3 major vendor contracts. The investor presentation, with my name in the document metadata as author. The employment comps for CFO-level work in the Austin market. Current figures showing what equivalent professional services would have cost the company if they'd paid market rate, and the agreement his attorney asked for a recess. When we came back, the other side's posture had changed. Not dramatically, they were still there to fight, but there was a quietness to it now, a recalibration. Donovan sat with his jaw set and didn't look at me directly, which was new. He had spent most of the morning looking at me with something I could only describe as contempt. Now he was looking at the table. The judge, a woman in her late 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain, reviewed the agreement for what felt like a long time. Then she looked at Donovan's attorney. "Counsel," she said, "I'm going to need you to explain to me how your client's position accounts for this document." He tried. He argued that the agreement predated the company's significant growth, that it couldn't have anticipated the current valuation, that the contributions documented were minor relative to the overall enterprise value. The judge did not appear persuaded. She didn't rule from the bench that day. Judges rarely do. But she asked a series of questions that made the shape of her thinking visible, and by the time we recessed for the afternoon, my attorney squeezed my arm and said quietly, "We're in very good shape." I sat in my car in the parking garage for a few minutes before I could drive. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't crying. I was just sitting there, trying to understand how I had gotten from that Sunday morning with the cereal bowl and the notary stamp to a courthouse parking garage in February 9 years later. The settlement came 6 weeks after the hearing. His attorneys reached out first, which told me everything I needed to know about how confident they were feeling. We negotiated for 3 weeks. I was awarded a cash payment representing the documented financial contributions plus market rate compensation for CFO equivalent services rendered, a number that, when my attorney read it to me, made me have to ask him to repeat it. I also retained my personal savings, the smaller of our 2 vehicles, and my professional credentials, which no one could take from me anyway, but which I felt the need to itemize. He kept the company. He kept a pot purple. That was the one thing I did not want to fight over, and not because I was being generous. I didn't want it. I had spent 9 years building something that was never going to have my name on it, and I had no interest in forcing my way onto a cap table as a parting gesture. What I wanted was to be compensated for what I had actually done, and to leave cleanly. That's what I got. My mother asked me, after it was all over, if I was angry. We were sitting on her back porch in San Antonio, drinking iced tea, the kind of quiet afternoon that only happens after something big has ended. I thought about it honestly. I was angry. I think I'll be angry about certain things for a long time. The years I gave without asking for anything to be formalized, the promotions I didn't pursue, the New York position I turned down. I'll carry some version of that for a while. That's just true. But I'm also, underneath the anger, something I didn't expect to feel this soon, grateful. Not to him, not to the situation. Grateful to the version of myself who went to a free Saturday morning seminar, asked questions, got the card, followed up, and sat down one Sunday morning with a stack of papers and asked her husband to sign something he barely read. That woman was careful in a way that saved me. I'm a CPA now. I passed my exam while the divorce was pending. I studied at night, at the kitchen table, with my personal savings dwindling and my future completely unclear, and I passed on my first attempt. I work for a small firm that specializes in financial consulting for startups. I am very good at what I do. I have never, since leaving, worked a single day without a written contract. My clients sometimes ask why I'm so meticulous about documentation, why I always want things in writing, why I build paper trails for things that other people handle on a handshake. I tell them I learned it from experience. What I don't tell them is that the most important document I ever signed was one I nearly forgot about, at the bottom of a cardboard box on a Tuesday morning when someone called me at 7 a.m. and asked me to sit down. I keep a copy of it in my desk now, not because I need it anymore, but because I want to remember what it feels like to have protected yourself before you knew you needed to.